They say money changes people, but that's not true. Money just shows you who they've been all along. The day I saw those winning numbers, my hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the ticket. Millions. Enough to wipe away years of struggle, of sleepless nights, of working myself to the bone just to survive. For a moment, I imagined the celebrations, the hugs, the joy of finally having something to share with my family. But then a thought crept in. A dark, uneasy thought. If I needed help right now before they knew I had anything, who would actually be there for me? Who would stand by me without expecting a reward? That's when I decided to keep my win a secret and to put them to the test. One by one, I reached out, telling them I was in trouble, that I needed a small loan to get through the month. I didn't ask for much, just enough to see if they cared. And one by one, they failed me. Excuses, cold dismissals, even condescending advice about how I should manage my life better. My own blood, my own family, all but one. Only one person without hesitation offered to help, not just with the small amount I asked for, but with more, worried I might be hiding how bad things really were. In that moment, my heart broke and hardened, because I realized the truth. I had the power to change all of our lives forever, and I was about to decide exactly whose life would change and whose would never be the same again. Before all of this, before the ticket, before the test, before I learned who really stood beside me, my life was quiet, small, and if I'm honest, a little lonely. I'm Charlotte, 29 years old, the kind of person people remember for helping out, but forget to invite to the celebration. I grew up in a family where love was a currency you had to earn, and I never had enough to buy it. My brother, Mark, was the golden child. He could do no wrong, even when he was making a mess of his own life. My mother adored him, showering him with praise and attention, while I was the one picking up the pieces, paying bills I didn't owe, covering mistakes I didn't make. I learned early that being useful was the only way to be noticed, and so I became everyone's problem solver. Need someone to babysit at the last minute? Call Charlotte. Need help moving across town? Call Charlotte. Need a loan you'll never repay? Well, you get the picture. But when I needed something, even something small, the silence was deafening. I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, the constant hum of dryers lulling me to sleep most nights. My days were a blur of double shifts, mornings behind a coffee counter, afternoons stocking shelves at a grocery store. My clothes smelled faintly of espresso and cardboard. My feet ached from standing for hours. But still I kept going, because stopping meant falling further behind. My dreams, traveling, buying a home, feeling free, were stuffed in a mental box labeled someday, gathering dust. And through it all, my family never asked how I was doing. They assumed I was fine because I didn't complain. I guess that's the thing. People get used to you being strong, so they forget you might need strength too. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming. Maybe I should have known that when I finally asked for help, they'd turn away. But the truth is, I still believed in them back then. I still believed that deep down, family meant something. And it took winning the lottery to find out just how wrong I was. If my life had been shaped by struggle, theirs had been shaped by entitlement. And that's what made them dangerous in ways they didn't even see. My brother Mark wasn't just the favorite. He was the sun in our family's little universe, and the rest of us were expected to orbit around him. He had a natural charm that made people forgive him for anything. Debts he never repaid, promises he never kept, responsibilities he never carried. He lived fast and careless, knowing that someone, usually me, would clean up the mess. My mother, Evelyn, was his greatest defender. She had this way of twisting reality until his failures became misunderstandings, and my sacrifices became overreactions. When she looked at me, it wasn't with pride, but with this constant, quiet disappointment, like I was failing some invisible test. Then there was Aunt Lorraine, sharp-tongued, always dressed like she was heading to a cocktail party, and somehow always knowing the most hurtful thing to say. She had money, more than enough, but giving it away was, in her words, bad for people's character. That's the thing about them. They didn't see their selfishness as cruelty. They thought they were just being realistic or teaching lessons. But underneath that polished family facade was something uglier, a belief that their comfort mattered more than anyone else's survival. Over the years, I'd learned to let their comments slide, to swallow my anger and move on, because confronting them never changed anything. But winning that lottery ticket, it lit something in me I hadn't felt in a long time. I saw them clearly, without the haze of excuses or obligation. And I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about years of being invisible in a family that only saw me when they needed something. They had spent my whole life taking without giving. And soon they were going to understand exactly what it felt like to be on the other side. It was a Thursday night, the kind of night that feels heavy for no reason when I bought the ticket. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift between the coffee shop and the grocery store, my back aching, my feet screaming, and the smell of burnt espresso still clinging to my hair. The gas station near my apartment was quiet, just the buzz of the flickering fluorescent lights and the faint hum of a cooler in the corner. I grabbed a bottle of water and, on impulse, maybe out of boredom, maybe out of hope, I slid a crumpled $10 bill across the counter and said, "Give me a ticket." I didn't even look at it until 2 days later. Saturday morning, half asleep and wrapped in a blanket, I pulled it out, scanning the numbers lazily, certain I'd find nothing. But as my eyes moved across the screen, one number after another matched. My breath caught in my throat. I checked again, then again. My hands started shaking so badly I dropped the ticket on the floor. I had just won millions. Millions. For a long moment, I sat there on the couch, stunned, my mind racing. A new apartment, no more double shifts, travel, freedom. But then reality set in. My family. I could already hear the sudden affection in their voices, see the fake warmth in their smiles, the way they'd show up not for me, but for what I had. And that's when the thought struck me. Sharp, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. If I really wanted to know who they were, all I had to do was pretend I had nothing. All I had to do was ask for help. That single idea changed everything. I went from being a tired, overworked woman holding a miracle in her hands to a hunter, setting the bait. I didn't rush. Revenge, I've learned, is best served slow, measured, and precise. I kept the ticket hidden in an old shoebox under my bed, the edges still crisp, as if it were waiting patiently for its moment. Then I started my test. One by one, I called them. First, my mother. I told her work had cut my hours and I was 2 weeks behind on rent. I didn't need much, just a few $100s to get through the month. Her voice softened for a moment, and I almost believed she'd help, until she sighed and said, "You really need to learn to budget better, Charlotte. I can't keep bailing you out." She never had, by the way. Then came Mark. I could hear music in the background when he picked up. Laughter, clinking glasses. I told him the same story. He chuckled and said, "Yikes. Bad timing, sis. I've got my own bills. Maybe try asking Mom." Aunt Lorraine was worse. She didn't even pretend to care. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "if I gave money to everyone who needed it, I'd be broke. You'll survive. You always do. Each call was like another layer of my hope peeling away, replaced by something colder, harder. I recorded every conversation, not for proof, but as a reminder. And then, just when I was beginning to think no one in my bloodline had a shred of decency, I called Emily. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask why I needed it or when I could pay her back. She just said, "How much do you need? I can bring it tonight." When I told her the amount, she offered more, worried I might be hiding how bad things were. That one act, that one simple moment of unconditional kindness, lit a fire in me. My plan was no longer just about testing them. It was about making sure the truth came out, in a way they'd never forget. After that night, Emily and I talked more than we had in years. She came over with the cash, tucked into an envelope so neatly it looked like she'd prepared it days in advance, as if she'd been waiting for the moment someone would need her. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry into my personal life. She just sat with me in my cramped little apartment, sipping tea from mismatched mugs, listening when I spoke, and filling the silences with a gentle kind of presence I hadn't felt from anyone in my family for as long as I could remember. Emily had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, the one people overlooked just like they overlooked me. She was polite, helpful, and unassuming, which in our family meant she was invisible. Maybe that's why we'd never gotten close before. We were both too busy surviving in the shadows of louder, needier relatives. But now, something shifted. I started to notice the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dream of opening a small art studio, how she'd been saving bit by bit from her part-time job, and how she kept those dreams alive even when no one else encouraged her. She didn't have much, but she gave without hesitation. That meant more to me than she could possibly know. Sitting there with her, I realized something important. Emily wasn't just the only person who had passed my test. She was proof that loyalty, kindness, and love still existed in this family. She was my anchor. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't just going to reward her, I was going to protect her. And everyone else? They were going to feel every ounce of the neglect they'd shown me, in a way they'd never be able to forget or forgive. Once I decided on my course, the rest fell into place with almost disturbing ease. I knew my family, their weaknesses, their egos, the way they thrived on appearances. If I wanted my revenge to cut deep, I had to make sure they were all watching when the truth came crashing down. So I planned a dinner. Not just any dinner, an elegant, picture-perfect gathering, the kind they loved to brag about on social media. I told them I wanted to reconnect after a rough couple of months, and like clockwork, they agreed, flattered by the idea of being the center of my attention. I rented a private dining room at one of the nicest restaurants in town, paid for in cash, of course, so nothing traced back to the lottery. I hired a videographer, telling them it was for a family documentary project I'd been thinking of. They smiled at that, probably imagining themselves as the stars of my little production. Meanwhile, I began rehearsing what I would say, carefully crafting my words so that every sentence would feel like a mirror held up to their selfishness. I wanted them to squirm, to hear their own voices, the very ones I had recorded, played back in front of everyone. And then, when they were drowning in their own shame, I would turn to Emily and give her everything they had just proven they didn't deserve. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about balance, about showing them the weight of every dismissal, every cold shoulder, every time they decided I wasn't worth their time. I wanted them to know that I had been watching all these years, and that this time, I was done playing the quiet, grateful background character in their lives. This time, I was going to be the one writing the ending. The night of the dinner, everything felt almost too perfect. the low golden light of the chandeliers, the polished silverware catching little sparks of reflection, the air rich with the smell of roasted meat and expensive wine. They arrived one by one, dressed to impress, their smiles wide, their voices just a touch too loud, like they were performing for an invisible audience. We made small talk over appetizers, the usual shallow updates about jobs, vacations, and gossip. No one asked how I'd been. Not really. When the main course arrived, I stood up, my heart steady in a way I didn't expect. The videographer adjusted the camera, and the room went still. I began with a thank you, for coming, for being my family, for sharing this night with me. I saw them bask in it, unaware of the storm about to hit. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a small speaker. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room first. "You need to learn to budget better, Charlotte." Then Mark's chuckle, dismissive and cruel. "Yikes. Bad timing, sis." Lorraine's cold tone followed. "You'll survive. You always do." Each clip was like a crack in their polished masks. Eyes darted, throats cleared, hands fidgeted with napkins. And then I said it, clear, calm, undeniable. 2 months ago, I won the lottery. Millions. I came to you not for money, but for help. And you failed me. Gasps, a fork clattering to the floor. I turned to Emily, who sat frozen in disbelief. You were the only one who stood by me without asking for anything in return. And because of that, every cent I have is going to you. The silence that followed was deafening. A mix of shock, outrage, and something that almost sounded like fear. I set the ticket on the table in front of Emily, smiled at her, and walked out. The sound of their protests chasing me into the night. The days after the dinner were a blur of chaos, but not for me. My phone lit up with calls, messages, and voicemails, some dripping with anger, others with desperation. Mark called first, his voice trembling between rage and pleading, accusing me of humiliating him in front of the family and ruining his reputation. My mother sent long, emotional texts about how I had misunderstood her, how everything she said was for my own good. Aunt Lorraine didn't bother with guilt. She went straight to venom, calling me ungrateful and predicting that I'd regret giving all that money to someone so naive. But their words couldn't touch me anymore. I had played their game for years, and now the board was mine. Emily, on the other hand, tried to give the ticket back, saying it was too much, that she hadn't done anything to deserve it. I told her the truth. It wasn't about what she did for me in that moment. It was about who she was all along. She had given freely when she had so little, and that was worth more than any number on a check. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread through the family. Old alliances crumbled. People who once gossiped together now avoided each other, unsure who might turn next. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying the weight of their problems. I watched from a distance as the cracks in their relationships widened, knowing I hadn't broken anything that wasn't already fractured. I had simply turned on the light so they could see the damage they'd done to themselves. And as for me, I slept better than I had in years. 6 months later, my life didn't look anything like it used to. Emily and I moved into a sunlit house by the coast, the kind where the morning air smells of salt and the sound of waves replaces the hum of dryers from the laundromat. We drank coffee on the balcony every morning, watching fishing boats drift out to sea, talking about our plans, her art studio, my travel list, the quiet joy of building a life with no debt, no fear, and no one taking more than they give. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering about the others, what they were saying about me now, whether they still told themselves I was the selfish one. But then I'd remember. I didn't owe them my thoughts anymore. I had spent years trying to earn love from people who measured it out in teaspoons, only to give it to those they deemed worthy. The truth was, I'd been worthy all along. I just hadn't believed it. That lottery ticket didn't just give me money. It gave me clarity. It showed me that family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when it matters. Revenge, I realized, isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about removing yourself from the people who would happily watch you drown and building your own shore instead. And in the end, I didn't just win the lottery. I won my freedom.